So a while back, I made a video exposing Kirei for the fraud that shedding a perspective on his character that was different from the norm. And surprisingly, a lot of people agree. They think that he should be held more accountable than what the story may give off. And what it had me thinking about is, despite all the things that Kirei has done, there's still characters that are way worse than him. And it got me thinking about some of our actual evildoers, Zouken and Kirei. And I wanted to kind of compare the two. Hopefully we can branch off into other timelines later on down the road, but for now I wanted to dive into where it all started. Over the years, I've had people come to the channel all the time saying that Kirei sucks, he needs to be dealt with, and then on the other side of the spectrum, you have people saying Zouken is the scourge of mankind. He's worse than evil. But across the board, what I've seen more than anything is always Zouken. And as I've said before, he's just out of sight, out of mind, so many people don't give him the credit. So who really is the greater evil here? Is it Zouken, a man who tried to save the world and ended up losing his way? Or is it Kirei, a man who tried to save the world by conforming to society's rules, even though deep down he always knew that he was biologically designed to be evil? For a person that doesn't know anything about fate, you might walk in and be like, oh, that's a no-brainer. The most evil is clearly the one that's biologically designed to be evil. It only makes sense until you start to really lay things out. From the time that we meet both characters, and I mean going back to their first two initial scenes where Zouken is talking down to Kirei for leaving the family and coming back, and then the scene with Kirei where you have Rize and Tokiyomi circling around him and preaching the concepts of this new magecraft world. They're both represented as people on the defense. I wouldn't necessarily say they're portrayed as good guys, but they do come off as somebody that's in the right. And what they're walking into is more so of devolution for their character, which is ironic. But the more you go through the story, you start to realize that this isn't actually the case, and it's a lot more layered than it seems. From events like Kirei choking out Kirisugu's wife just to see what makes him tick, there was no other reason for him to do this other than to find out how Kirisugu was wired, just so he could understand. To Zouken torturing his own descendant throughout the entirety of the story just for the sake of him doing so, whether they were related or not, he didn't care. He felt like that was something that was owed to him. From Kirei taking the life of Tokiyomi and then handing off that same weapon to his child like he was doing her a favor, to Zouken defiling a child, that being Sakura, all the way up until the time that she reached adulthood, part of which being just the process of his plan, and then the other half is just the fact that he truly didn't care. It wasn't him, so there was really no price to pay. From Kirei operating on not only Shiro but Sakura as well, doing the best job that he possibly could on saving their lives just because he knew that he needed them both at their full potential to get what he wanted. To Zouken doing things like finding out that Shinji's mother was someone who couldn't produce him an heir, so he looked at her as defective and just threw her in the basement and let her ended up being worm food. That's what happened to Shinji's mother. Harley talks about it. Harley bats an eye. That's a really important character, and she basically just became another sacrifice. And it's not just her. All the people that Zouken sacrificed up until that point to maintain his form, which is countless, men and women, and it simply boiled down to who he caught at the time. We're talking the centuries that he's been alive. And don't get me started on Kirei with the orphans. Now on one end, you can look at it in a way that gives this perception that Kirei wants Angra to be born because he realizes that this entity is a lot like him, and he jumped through a lot of hoops and over a lot of hurdles to make sure that this came to fruition. However, his dream couldn't even exist had Zouken not turned Sakura into a second Holy Grail in the first place. So it is hilarious to think that these two actually don't like each other, when in reality, majority of Kirei's motivation in Stay Night was completely thanks to Zouken. And here you have Kirei being the same person to give Zouken his actual first death. He exercised his main body, contrarily. And this is the thing about that. Yes, Kirei wanted to unleash Angra, but Zouken was the one that set it up. And I'm just highlighting a few examples here. And to think more into the mental state, Kirei is at least known for being psychotic. There was nothing actually wrong with Zouken, at least the way the story presented him. No birth defects or conditions like Kirei or Shiro, and even Kiritsugu. Zouken's situation was literally him just devolving into being a whack job. So in that vein, there's really no excuse for him. Yeah, he wanted to save the world, but look what he turned into. And we know he did flee from Russia. Maybe he saw something there that we lack the details on. There was a lot more like Kiritsugu's childhood than we know, especially since it implies that his original line was wiped out in front of him. And he knew the cost. Zouken isn't dumb. The potential of sacrificing 5 billion people. And I say 5 billion because that was the state of the world back then. He's not the first person to become immortal, and we all know that there's no way that you reach these types of forms without there being at least some sort of a trade-off. In fact, I'm more than certain that he was aware that he might lose himself in the process, but I'm sure in the back of his mind, he was thinking, okay, if I get there first, then there wouldn't be anything to worry about. Unfortunately, his sanity beat him to the punch. So after some thorough examination, and trust me, Kirei is one of my favorite characters, I'm gonna be honest, neither one of these dudes can be trusted. Throw them both in the slammer. But in reality, it's gotta be Zouken. At least to me, there's no way around it. People used to think that I was kidding when I said that Kirei was heroic in the sense that he did his best to hold himself back for the sake of everybody else. We're talking, what, 25 years? He was 25 by the time that Fate Zero finally started, because he did get his command spells 3 years early. And he was only actually evil from the end of Zero up until the end of Stay Night, which is just a little over 10 years. Even when he took up the mantle of being a villain, he didn't do it like a regular psycho. He wasn't going around and harming people indiscriminately like a Kiritsugu, for instance, who's supposed to be the anti-hero. Everything Kirei did had tact and purpose. And the craziest thing about this is that the two of them don't even like each other. Kirei and Zouken, I mean. With all of these methods and how far the both of them would go to reach their goals, you would think they would work better as a team. But even amongst themselves as evildoers, they have their own way of bringing things together, neither of which is something that aligns with the other. Really interesting. And it really just goes to show once again how well connected the story is when even the villains, being in opposition, still find a way to complement each other in the end. And even after all of these years, all of these villains that we ran into, especially in FGO, they still stand among some of the best opposing forces that we've had from the franchise.